Good morning, everyone. My name is Sandra Lapointe, and I'm a professor of philosophy at McMaster University. I'm also the director of the collaborative. If you'd like to know a little bit more about the collaborative, I invite you to click on the link that we posted in the discussion box, where you will find a summary of the session and also some information about what the collaborative is. I'm speaking to you this morning from Hamilton, where McMaster is situated. McMaster is situated on the traditional territories of the Haudenosaunee people and the Mississauga people, and it's also on a land which is covered by the Dish with One Spoon wampum agreement, and I would like to acknowledge that, and I would like to invite you to think about the land on which you reside as well. I'm extremely thankful for our panel this morning. This is a session that I've been fantasizing about for a long time, and I would like to start by introducing our speakers in the order in which they will be presenting. First, we have Ms. Nancy Amzawi, sorry. Nancy is Assistant Deputy Minister, and she's the Federal Lead for Policy and Strategic Integration. She's also the Acting Federal Lead for Testing, Tracing, and Data Strategy at Health Canada. Nancy became the Assistant Deputy Minister of Science and Technology branch in October 2018. Before that, she has a lot of experience working within government in science-related topics. She joined Environment and Climate Change Canada in 2004, and she has held positions in international affairs, in ecosystem and biodiversity policy. She was also part of the Corporate Secretariat and Environment Protection Operations. So thanks so much, Nancy, for accepting to be with us this morning. I'm delighted that you're here, and I'm looking forward for your input in these discussions. I'm also very glad to have Dr. Claudia Emerson, my colleague at McMaster University. Claudia is the founding director of the Institute on Ethics and Policy for Innovation at McMaster. She's a professor in the Department of Philosophy, and she is an associate member of the Department of Medicine in the Faculty of Health Science. Claudia has served in several advisory capacities related to public and health innovation, and most recently, she's also served on task force related to the COVID-19 pandemic response. She frequently advises the World Health Organization. She serves on the Ethical, Legal, and Social Implication Panel of DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, which actually is addressing evolving pathogenic and viral threats. And in 2018, she was appointed a member of the Malaria Strategic Advisory Panel of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. She actually holds many projects which are funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Claudia is also a leading member of two of the task forces of the Global Nexus for Pandemic and Biological Threats, which is an initiative that has been launched by McMaster very recently. Thanks, Claudia, for being here and calling from Portugal. Thank you very much. Our panel also includes Ursula Goebel. Ursula is Vice President, Stakeholder Engagement and Advancements of Society at the Social Science and Humanities Research Council of Canada. In her role, Ursula provides strategic leadership to advance and to mobilize social science and humanities research. Ursula's team at SSHRC is responsible for communication, strategic foresight, partnership development, and engagement with stakeholders. In the past, she has led the development and the implementation of strategic communications at SSHRC. She's been involved in the CRC program, in the Canada Excellence Research Chair program, and with Future Challenges, in which capacity she has led the strategic initiatives to actually advance the social science and humanities contributions toward meeting future long-term societal challenges. And finally, but not least, and of course, Ursula, thank you so much for making time to be with us. Finally, but not least, we are pleased to also include in our discussion Dr. Pascal Michel, who is the Chief Science Officer of the Public Health Agency of Canada. In this role, Pascal is responsible for overseeing and leading excellence and innovation in agency science, as well as to provide corporate leadership on science policy issues. Prior to his current responsibilities, Pascal completed one doctorate degree in veterinary medicine at the University of Montreal after a master's in preventive veterinary medicine, but he also has a second PhD in epidemiology from the University of Guelph. He joined the federal service in 1997 as a senior epidemiologist, and then he's directed the public health risk science division of the National Microbiology Laboratory before serving as a senior science advisor to the Assistant Deputy Minister of the Infectious Disease Prevention and Control branch. All right, so I have all these beautiful people around the table this morning, and I am thrilled because we want to be discussing not only the question of pandemics and biological threat, but more specifically, the contributions that social science and humanities research can make to these. It's clear that addressing pandemics and biological threat requires coordinated research, for the research itself, but also in terms of testing novel treatments and vaccines and developing diagnostic tools. But in parallel, it's also important to address and to identify the associated human, social, economic, and ethical challenges which come with these opportunities, but also which help us better understand the risks. All of these questions require us to rely on data-driven evidence, which is, of course, crucial to informing decision makers, who in turn will design and implement pandemic plans and protocols and actions. So our questions this morning, and those are the questions that we've been thinking together about, are the following. How can we ensure that social science and humanities knowledge and expertise is effectively mobilized to support these efforts? What does a postgraduate training look like that foster the relevant collaborative skills and in interdisciplinary settings? Because it's quite obvious that in order for knowledge to be properly mobilized, we need to engage in interdisciplinary endeavors. How do we build the skills that are necessary for interdisciplinary collaborations? How can we support diversity, collaboration, and creativity as key components of both technological and social innovation, which are critical to building these resilient communities at home and around the world? Those are the questions that launched our reflection, and I would like to just invite Nancy to jump right in and to maybe tell us a little bit about that, after which Claudia will also bring some thoughts, and we'll have a first round of discussion. This is going to be the model for our panel this morning. So Nancy, I'll let you take it away.
Much, Sandra. A very kind introduction, and good morning, everyone. It is a privilege to be part of this distinguished panel and to connect with you all today on this very important discussion. My views come from the perspective of my most recent experience working on COVID-19 and the important role of testing and screening. Our team has a strong science policy arm that has been tracking the state of science, all disciplines of science, which for COVID has been changing at an extremely rapid pace as we develop more and more experience with the virus and its variants. Our policy team has been layering on social and economic considerations to chart policy approaches on the use of rapid tests that are implemented by our program team that has established channels with provinces and territories, the private sector, including pharmacies, a major channel for us, as well as the not-for-profit sector, working closely with, for example, the Canadian Red Cross. Every single day, we look at issues like the evolving behavior and readiness of individuals to be tested. We've come a long way since the beginning of the pandemic when there was significant reluctance to be tested. If you think back to the early days of the pandemic, to today where test kits are picked up at local schools or they're sent home in children's backpacks. Significant evolution there. But this evolution has been quite uneven. We have an expert panel on testing and screening. And in their first report in January 2021, they stressed the importance of equity considerations to ensure that we bring tests to everyone, and particularly to those who are most vulnerable or at risk. We've invested in both improving our understanding as well as equipping those who are best placed to support these communities. Through this experience, we learned the power and importance of public confidence. Although difficult to quantify or measure, we found means like public opinion research that confirm the importance that high quality rapid tests have and are playing in building confidence for families to visit loved ones in long-term care or for workers to feel safe going to work. The key expectations of our policy advice and for monitoring the effectiveness of our programs has been the integrity and robustness of our data. That has been fundamental. And in the context of the pandemic, it has been difficult to maintain comprehensive data sets across the country. Nevertheless, performance data has been constantly requested of us to adjust policy direction and program operations every step of the way. Switching channels to a different global challenge, I have the privilege of being the Assistant Deputy Minister of Science and Technology at Environment and Climate Change Canada. During that time, I had the honor of overseeing the landmark Canada's Changing Climate Report that outlined how and why Canada's climate has changed and what changes are projected for the future and the impact on Canadians and global citizens. It was this report that brought attention to the fact that Canada's climate is warming at twice the global average and 3 times the rate in the north. It noted the effects of widespread warming being evident in many parts of Canada and projected to intensify in the future. In Canada, these impacts include more extreme heat, less extreme cold, longer growing seasons, shorter snow and ice cover seasons, earlier spring break, stream flow, thinning glaciers, the thawing permafrost, and rising sea level. Extreme hot temperatures will become more frequent and more intense, and this will increase the severity of heat waves and contribute to increased drought and wildfire risks. While inland flooding results from multiple factors, more intense rainfalls will increase urban flood risks, and coastal flooding is expected to increase in many areas of Canada due to local sea level rise. It is heartbreaking to see these projections become reality, and these impacts capture the nexus of significant environmental, health, social, and economic impacts. Where we sat at Environment and Climate Change Canada, we were thrilled to develop Climate Science 2050, which is a plan for advancing science and knowledge on climate change. And it is a plan that was developed and designed and very much positioned to directly support evolving policy and program approaches. I would like to take a minute just to emphasize a few of the key principles that underpin this plan, because I really do believe that they are universal and could be adopted to all wicked challenges of our time, whether health related or otherwise. First, ensuring the equity of diverse knowledge systems, making space for Indigenous leadership and innovation, and recognizing that Indigenous knowledge is a distinct network of knowledge systems that cannot be integrated into Western science, but there are spaces where the two can coexist and co-create knowledge, really appreciating that. Indigenous self-determination in research to support an approach that is holistic, place-based, and responsive, and that respects Indigenous sovereignty and ownership of data and Indigenous knowledge. And in fact, we called it a science and knowledge plan for that very reason, the emphasis on the knowledge. Embracing interdisciplinarity to produce science and knowledge that reflects the complexity and interconnections, in this case, inherent in climate change, and that encompasses different kinship systems and relationships with the land. Emphasizing collaboration across generations, disciplines, sectors, orders of government, organizations, and regions to bring together a range of experiences, perspectives, and areas of expertise. Adopting a flexible, adaptive approach in science and knowledge activities to be responsive to emerging priorities, challenges, and opportunities. And my experience has been continues to be regularly emerging, new and emerging priorities. Applying an intersectional lens that considers how climate change, in this particular case, intersects with various identity factors like race, class, gender, to develop solutions that tackle both climate change and inequity, removing systemic barriers and promoting well-being. And then responding to local and regional contexts, needs, priorities, and ways of knowing involving communities affected by the research to produce tailored and effective adaptation and mitigation efforts for climate change. In summary, addressing global health crises such as the COVID-19 pandemic and climate change requires a coordinated research effort. This work allows us to better understand, predict, and ultimately help inform individual decision making. Improved understanding of human behavior will allow decision makers to better identify and address the associated human, social, economic, and ethical challenges, opportunities, and risks. And underlying all of these efforts is the reliance on robust data-driven evidence to inform decision makers as they design and implement strategic plans, protocols, and actions during crises and to prepare for the future. So just a few thoughts to get us started. Happy to jump in there, and thank you very much.
Great. So thanks very much for the opportunity, and Sandra. I'm delighted to be here with this distinguished panel of colleagues to discuss, I think, a really important question, a really important set of issues. And I want to reflect a little bit on the title of our panel, Mobilizing Social Sciences and Humanities to Address Global Health Crises. And I think that what we've seen and what we've known now for some time, that it is critically important to mobilize social science knowledge and humanities knowledge. But I do think that we have to go a little bit beyond just mobilizing and actually get into integrating. So we want to be one step ahead. And I want to reflect on sort of a few experiences that I've had in my work in global health. So we've known for a long, long time that it's critically important to have this type of research, what we often refer to as the soft sciences. And I think quite unfairly, the contrast between the hard and the soft sciences, because in fact, I do think that social sciences and humanities work is actually very challenging, because we're talking about people, we're talking about ethical, social, cultural issues, which are thorny normative issues to navigate. And one of the things that we know is that it's critically important to mobilize this type of knowledge, particularly in public health, because along the innovation continuum, from the point of discovering novel tools to their testing, adoption, and ultimately uptake by communities, that it's critically important to have a community and stakeholder engagement. And having that component is then essential to have this type of scholarship. And we know that it doesn't matter how wonderful the intervention, how wonderful the new novel diagnostic or vaccine or drug that you have, if there isn't an appropriate engagement with the communities, if there isn't an appropriate acceptance for these tools, they're not going to be used. And we've seen time and time again how lots of tremendous, great products are not, well received by the communities because they weren't engaged right from the very beginning in both either the design of the studies, understanding the nature of the problems or the challenges, and then, coming together. Nancy mentioned the term co-create knowledge. So the co-creation of knowledge and in solving solutions. And so what the pandemic has shown us, in fact, is that these problems can actually be quite acute and amplified in times of crises, right? So we saw at the very beginning that there were traditionally marginalized communities and equity-seeking communities, Black, Indigenous, and communities of color that were hesitant to engage in research for the pandemic early on, for the development of vaccines and drugs and treatments. They were also skeptical about, for example, donating convalescent plasma. And part of that is because there is an unfortunate history there of exploitation, of inequity, of misinformation. And so it really took a lot to mobilize these communities to engage and to be part of the response and to be recipients. So to really take part and have equitable access, as Nancy mentioned, to some of these drugs, diagnostics, and the sorts of things that we need. And part of that is engaging the social sciences and humanities scholars to come in and to work with communities and to understand their perspectives, their interests, their fears, their concerns, and to bring them along right from the very beginning to engage. So that's a critically important piece. And I'm just going to highlight two sort of examples of where we see this, because I mentioned at the start that it's much more than mobilizing, that I think we have to get to a point of integration. And so one example in my work in global health, I work with a not-for-profit consortium, Target Malaria, which is focused on novel innovation to address malaria. And what we have right from the beginning is a commitment from this type of consortium researchers to incorporate and actually embed the social science and humanity research right from the start. So not as an adjunct, not as an add-on, not as it's usually done, where you oftentimes have these large science enterprises and you have some small component that's dedicating to understanding the ethical, social, cultural dimensions of problems. But in this case, actually incorporating stakeholder engagement and incorporating a commitment to understanding the ethical, social, cultural impacts of research, in their case, Gene Drive, which is very novel, a first-in-class that's being developed over the course of several years and that will ultimately be tested and used in malaria endemic communities in Africa. And so they've built this in right from the very beginning. But this requires, I think, really two very important things. One, a tremendous commitment on the part of funders, so private, public funders, whoever's supporting the research, to really support this type of research as part of the science itself. And two, it requires a deep commitment from the researchers themselves to see themselves not just beyond the lab, that they have this kind of responsibility to engage with the communities that they are ultimately aiming to be responsive to. And so to incorporate that kind of work and to work very collaboratively, and in a very interdisciplinary fashion, actually as part of the research, to address some of the concerns that the communities might have. So at the end of the day, these novel interventions, these things that are going to be responsive to whether we're talking about malaria, we're talking about a global pandemic, that there's going to be receptivity on the part of communities and that there's going to be uptake. And I'll just mention sort of my second example, that it's precisely what we're trying to do at McMaster with the Global Nexus for Pandemic and Biological Threats. As part of our work there, we're really trying to pull together in a very collaborative and interdisciplinary fashion the different strands. And so this is really an all hands on deck type of effort. So we've got all our faculties engaged, really drawing on the strengths of the sciences, the engineering, business, social sciences, humanities, to really bring these different lenses at the same time. So not in sort of sequence as it might have happened in the past, but really at the same time to address these complex problems in a very integrated fashion. And this is one way I think that we can work to address complexity. And so I would just like to then highlight something that Nancy said, which I think is then critically important. And this is where something that social science researchers and humanities researchers can really make a deep and important contribution. Nancy mentioned a really important set of principles. So this idea of principles, which in my experience working in global health, can really be the anchor to move so many things forward. When we're thinking about complex problems, whether in a pandemic response, addressing the climate crisis, social economic disruption, we're talking about very complex problems which are multifaceted, lots of different dimensions. And so how do we come up with a response or solutions that are going to be, that there's going to be receptivity, that there's going to be acceptance, that there's going to be buy-in and shaping collectively from different communities and from the public at large. Well, when people come to the table, they bring different values, they bring different interests, they bring sometimes different cultural understandings, particularly when it's something like climate change, like pandemic, these types of global crises. You're going to have lots of different views at the table. And the common language, I think, can be principles. Principles can be the anchor that can go past the different values and interests and really unite scientists, social scientists, policymakers, and decision makers around a common set of goals. So this is how we delineate the shared goals and how you can make progress moving forward together. So in sum, I do think that there is much that social science and humanities can contribute to addressing crises. We have seen this time and time again in global health and in public health. I think the pandemic really showed us the value, and where there's gaps, where we need to, I think, work harder to bring this kind of knowledge and sensibility in, and we have to do it in a way that we're prepared for it, much what we're trying to do with the Global Nexus at McMaster, and that is integrate from the beginning. So not just mobilize, but integrate from the beginning. So right from the start, there is a preparedness, there's a way in which we can work together and collaborate together to address these complexities. So I'll pause there. Thank you.
Claudia, thank you so much, Nancy. Actually, I'm thrilled. I was going to ask Nancy for a list of priorities in mobilizing social science and humanities knowledge, but I think that we have a good recording of priorities and we should set that as an agenda. And on the other hand, I was going to ask Claudia about, how should we bring this social science and humanities knowledge, which is very rich, to bear? And the answer is integration, but very pragmatic integration that is bringing the people to get together, and we have a good description. So maybe I'm going to ask you a different question, which you haven't addressed, but I'd be very curious to know what you think. Because there's a general feeling that expert advice from the social science and humanities in disciplines that are very broad, sociology, but also philosophy and anthropology and the behavioral science, is actually underutilized by policymakers themselves. So that's a different question. So integration is one important question. How do we bring all these scientists to work together with social science and humanities researchers to be able to produce good answers to complex problems? But then there's, how do we bring that knowledge to policy makers so that they can develop policies that are going to make sense? So what do you think is the barrier? And I'd like to start with Nancy, because you're the policymaker, or you're one of them. So what do you think? You have the feeling that you're getting all the information that you need from the social science and humanities? And if not, what's missing? Is it because you feel that maybe social science and humanities researchers fail to mobilize the knowledge effectively, or what do you also have that feeling?
So great question, Sandra. I guess a couple of things. And again, reflecting on my most recent experience in the COVID-19 testing, contact tracing, and data strategies secretariat, we one of the first things that we did was we established a secretariat and put in place an expert panel that advised the minister on advice on COVID-19. They focused particularly on testing and screening. And one of the things that the minister was very clear on was that her expectation, for example, that there be an expert in bioethics, part of that committee, side by side, shoulder to shoulder with the infectious disease specialist, for example. So it really was an inclusive, interdisciplinary conversation around how advice to the minister on rolling out testing and screening strategies across the country. That was I found very powerful. And so, although you were saying barriers, I think we have some great success stories. And in fact, we took that model a little bit further, and we wanted to invest in pandemic preparedness for the future. And so we actually, in addition to the expert panel, who are esteemed experts in their field, we developed a shadow panel of postgraduate students who actually undertook the analytical support to help, for example, with lit reviews, et cetera, to support the panel. And they were presenting their quick research. So I would say for us, in my experience, the key barrier is timelines. Huge pressure to make policy decisions quickly in the face of these kinds of challenges, and the need to maximize the ability to benefit from the wealth of knowledge across all disciplines, and these kinds of tools have been, I found, very, very powerful. But I would say it's that timeline disconnect that has been our biggest challenge.
Yeah, thanks, Nancy. It's a very interesting. I'm glad to know that bioethicists are being involved, but maybe my question for Claudia would be to bring some insights into this. You're a bioethicist. You've been working in that space, so you're used to mobilizing your knowledge to inform broader scientific enterprise and create change and answer global crises. Who else in the social science needs to be involved besides ethicists? Because complex problems definitely have an ethical component, but they also have, human and social components that require a lot of knowledge. What do you think about who else should be involved in these panels, in your opinion, Claudia?
Yeah, thanks very much, Sandra, for that question. So I think because the problems are complex, and so I think there's two things we have to think about is the nature of the problem. So if we're dealing with normative issues, broadly speaking, then it's, obviously there's an ethics component, and so it's terrific to hear bioethicists sitting on panels and advising, as Nancy mentioned, and I think we see more and more of that, in particular in the pandemic response. Certainly, my colleagues and I, folks in my field, were quite engaged with the WHO and others in responding to some of these issues. I think the other sort of really important perspectives at the table need to be other expertise, such as cultural anthropologists, those with social science understanding that work out in communities, doing ethnography and that. And of course, importantly, I think you need to have the stakeholders themselves. So certainly in our work in global health, there's, if you want, you started with the question, like, how do you get policymakers and decision makers to adopt, is to have that conversation, as Nancy was talking about. You have a panel of experts and you engage with them. And so us as scholars, as researchers, we have a responsibility to make sure that the work that we're doing has impact, has an impact focus, that it's practical. So there's always going to be room for theoretical and conceptual exercises, but when the rubber hits the road and you really need to have that practical advice, the things that's really going to support a decision maker, a policy maker in their thinking, then you really do need to engage with them. And I think the same is true, and we do this certainly in global health with the end users, right? So who's going to use the diagnostics? Which communities are you trying to target? who's, at the end of the day, who are the populations that you're trying to reach. And it's important to have those voices. And more importantly, to have those voices, particularly amplify the voices that have historically been quiet, the ones who haven't been at the table, or who have been at the table but have not been able to speak as freely, or have been more hesitant to speak. Like, we want to hear from those voices and try to understand, what can we do to support and mobilize the things that we need for the things that need to have impact on the ground. So I think those are the voices that have to be around the table, definitely.
And I think that there's something that Nancy mentioned in your presentation, which is the importance of understanding how Indigenous knowledges can contribute to this enterprise. And your comments about the value of end-user integrated research and having the end users integrated throughout the whole process and providing input even in the definition of the research problems is actually something that reflects the best practices when it comes to research around Indigenous populations. And there's anything that we can do is definitely really pay attention to what this brings in terms of uptake of policy, but also in terms of the effectiveness of the solutions that we come up with when we integrate the. So thank you very much for this. For this. We're going to come back to a more general discussion with the public later, but I think we should go to our next two speakers, Ursula and Pascal. So I'm going to leave them the floor. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sandra. Hello, everyone. Bonjour à tous et toutes. I'm truly delighted to join everyone in this discussion on this very important topic, which of course is at the heart of our work at the Social Science Humanities Research Council. I would like to begin, however, by acknowledging that I am joining you as we in SSHRC's offices and operations are based here on the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe peoples. So I'm so pleased to follow, in fact, Nancy and Claudia's opening remarks, because you're going to hear similar themes in my opening remarks as well. And that's really important, because we recognize the importance of key principles and activities, and the ones that I really want to focus on is on knowledge mobilization in the context of the principles of knowledge mobilization. And we'll share some examples of the work that we've been undertaking to strengthen the contributions of social science and humanities research to address global challenges, in current and future challenges, emerging challenges and future challenges, interdisciplinarity, multidisciplinarity, transdisciplinary, and cross-sector collaboration. But I'd also like to add the component of student engagement and training, which is absolutely critical as we're looking to the next generation of leaders across academic, public sector, private sector, community sector to carry on that work to contribute to global challenges in the future. So I will share some examples in my opening remarks and as well in the discussion following. So there's no question that Canadian researchers or researchers from the social sciences have stepped up to help Canada and the world face the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. And we see this in many ways, in multiple ways. They continue to offer policymakers the evidence needed to navigate some of the most difficult questions posed by the virus, from the impact on marginalized communities and peoples and populations, the management of food security, the evolving nature of learning and teaching. Je vais juste ajouter quelques mots en français aussi, alors pour la service d'interprétation, juste prendre une pause. Alors, la mobilisation des connaissances, c'est certain, de la recherche entre les divers groupes de chercheurs, de dirigeants politiques, de chefs d'entreprise et de groupes communautaires est essentielle à notre capacité en tant que pays de relever les prochains grands défis de demain, mais aussi pour maintenir ce type de système de mobilisation des connaissances à l'avenir. Le Canada doit continuer à s'assurer que les réseaux de recherche sont collaboratifs et inclusifs, que les connaissances existantes sont synthésées et que le talent est constamment cultivé. And so I'm going to move to multidisciplinarity for a moment. And this was brought up certainly in Claudia's remarks as well. And there's no question that responding, and not only responding, but recognizing that we can capitalize on research, knowledge, and talent at any time on issues that are already addressing the global challenge before perhaps they are perceived as a significant global challenge. But it does require knowledge drawn from different academic disciplines, different stages of careers in research, reflecting a diversity of methodologies, certainly perspectives and knowledge systems. And again, reiterate the significant importance of acknowledging diverse knowledge systems, indigenous knowledge systems. And we certainly see this happening in the context of the pandemic. It has certainly accelerated not only that recognition, but that collaboration and that interest in the participation. And we've certainly, through the tri-agencies and through SSHRC, we've offered innovative funding opportunities to address that, in addition to our existing open programs for partnership grants, for example, to the New Frontiers in Research Fund, a dedicated special call on innovative approaches to research in the pandemic context. We've just completed an experimental pilot project of an ideas lab on the topic of Canada and the circular economy, to really look and explore, again, what are the barriers? And as Sandra mentioned, the reference to barriers in the context of public sector and academic collaboration, but what are the barriers as well that are perhaps impeding true interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary research and collaboration? So the Ideas Lab that we just held was an opportunity to bring scholars together who've never worked with each other before, different stages of career, across research disciplines, to actually come together over a period of time and develop their research proposals together in a span of a few days, but also to have the peer mentoring. So it's recognizing that having collaborative opportunities to develop new research proposals that are very, very innovative must also reflect innovative approaches to merit review. So really looking at that full spectrum. And we look forward to sharing the outcome of that in the coming months. Let's also recognize in the international context. And if we look at the UN Research Roadmap on COVID-19 recovery, and SSHRC was certainly a key collaborator in that roadmap and the development of the roadmap, along with a number of other Canadian international organizations. And it was acknowledged through that work that international, very highly significant international collaboration, that recovering from the pandemic will depend on those bold efforts to strengthen health systems, to shore up social protections, to protect economic opportunities, to bolster multilateral collaboration and enhance social cohesion. So yet it provides another opportunity to really reimagine societies using a human rights lens and initiate the transformative changes needed to achieve a better future outcome. Other opportunities in the international realm, the Transatlantic Platform, which is a consortium of social sciences and humanities research granting agencies across the Americas and Europe, launched our third joint research call on recovery, renewal, and resilience in the post-pandemic world. So here you see a tremendous opportunity for researchers to work together in international teams, and they're in addition to Canada, Brazil, Colombia, Finland, France, Germany, South Africa, UK, and US, among others, really expanding that opportunity for different perspectives, methodologies, and important context here of data sharing. So just as it requires the involvement of multidisciplines and knowledge mobilization, also requires cross-sector collaboration. And this was noted clearly in the context of having that voice, but also having the influence on what the research will be focused on to meet the needs of different stakeholders and rights holders. And so if we're looking at complex challenges such as managing effective global health and wellness systems, we need to ensure that those critical linkages are established across different sectors, such as healthcare and education, public administration, and technology. And so these stronger channels for collaboration among academics in the policy community, the business community, and the not-for-profit community is an opportunity to really leverage those respective areas of expertise and enable that interconnected approach to inform successful policy and practice, both in the short term, and Claudia mentioned this in terms of addressing the short-term needs, but as well recognizing how can these relationships So it's more than, in addition to building on those opportunities to have a conversation, is the goal to establish the relationship, a mutually beneficial relationship where over the long term, the outcomes and the products, if you will, of those and the outcomes of those relationships can really capitalize. And this is so significant, and we've seen this in the examples of what we clearly know. Just quickly end on this last point before we get up after Pascal for a further discussion is, well, how do we help identify what these global challenges are? Do we wait? Do we wait for them to be significantly before us, upon us, as a catalyst then to generate these collaborations? Well, no. And the work that we've undertaken, because first of all, we recognize that our research community is, and Canada has a very, very strong research community, certainly in the social science and humanities, that is researching these topics, that we do have research capacity that can further be strengthened in the context of the contributions to addressing policy issues, decision-making across all sectors. And so our work in this area began, in fact, in 2012 through our Imagining Canada's Future initiative, where we began to look at, well, what are the global challenges that will be facing Canada in significant ways, where social science humanities research is deemed critical. And so we undertook a foresight exercise with external partners to identify 6 global challenges. And we then undertook a number of mechanisms, knowledge synthesis grants and forums and collaborations to mobilize that research and then effectively convene and find mechanisms to convene with policymakers, stakeholders, rights holders, opportunities to share that knowledge. But what we've seen over the years since we've launched this is those relationships have now have strengthened, and the outcomes of small knowledge synthesis grants have in fact identified where there's interest in new research. It has inspired new research questions, and the funding mechanisms to support those new research projects are available at any time. So it's ensuring that there's a continuum that will strengthen these relationships over time, that will build research capacity, that will help meet both current and future knowledge needs, but ultimately will foster that relationship building. And just to build on Claudia's point in terms of understanding the needs of the policy community, also strengthening the tools and providing the training as needed and where wanted to strengthen those tools so that scholarly outputs are still of course encouraged and are produced, but they also produce evidence briefs and succinct summaries that can actually identify what policy requirements and mechanisms are needed to address particular issues, but also inform, in fact, those assessments. And we've seen also not only growing participation of researchers across all stages of their careers, but we've also saw a significant growth of interest from the policy community to partner with SSHRC, to either co-fund these competitions and activities, or bringing forward their challenges to see how we can collaborate to further connect with the social science humanities research community. And some of these partners may not seem to be the natural alliance with social science humanities research when you look at Infrastructure Canada, the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada. So again, seeing those linkages and recognizing that there's an opportunity here by which we can capitalize. And I'll address the topic of skills development and student support, I think, in the opening conversation. Thank you.
Bonjour à tous, c'est un grand plaisir d'être parmi vous aujourd'hui dans cette session très, très excitante en fait. So great pleasure to speak after my distinguished colleagues here and to add some perspective of my own to this great discussion. First, I'd like to say, well, obviously, the Public Health Agency of Canada is at the center of the response to the COVID-19, but it's also by its very own structure at the center of every health crisis response that we've had over the past 15 years or so. And so it is in our DNA to really try to bring the best action considering of the evidence, the ethics, and the economics of what we're doing. I'd like to take a few observations here. So my first is on like every epidemic brings up a highlight of how strong a domain of social science as we need. And so I remember very well when we respond to the Ebola crisis, how important suddenly the anthropologists were in the world. And they came as like, oh man, we should have paid more attention to integrate anthropology more in the mechanism by which we're responding. And there's networks and there's capacity that develop after that. We can name them all, like whether it is the H1N1 response, the Warburton outbreak, the response to the rising of West Nile virus and Lyme disease. It all brings a side of social science that almost as an afterthought, we said, oh, we should have actually brought those disciplinary expertise way earlier into the conversations for a better response, whether it is communication, whether it is behavioral sciences, whether it is philosophy. I remember very well, and when we started to think about the One Health concepts to address vector-borne disease, we needed the sociologists and philosopher and psychologists to really guide us through the whole spectrum of considerations that we need to do. Geography and so many other fields are actually been highlighted and popping up at the time. So, which brings me to one of the, there's two frames by which we're responding to health crisis. One is the frame of epidemiology, and you may very well know that there's the bug in itself, what we call the agent, and we tend to put quite a bit of attention to what that is. And in the case of COVID, what is the virus? And we have a lot of people in the biomedical science that kind of dissect the virus and tell us, what to expect there. There's a host, and whether it is an animal host or a human host, that basically interface with this agent. And by the virtue of their interface, we can, decrease or increase the risk of the host being infected with the agent. But of course, it's very well known by everyone that the environment by which the host and the agent are interacting is absolutely crucial. And when we talk about the environment, we talk about the social environment, the cultural environment, and physical environment. Of course, in the radio right now, you've heard quite a bit about the role of ventilation, the role of clean air in order to control COVID, but the role of strong communities, the role of connections that we keep with our loved ones are as important to build up that resilience and has a very direct effect on health. And as a matter of fact, the second framework by which we're working strongly when we do a public health responses, we look at the physical, mental, and spiritual aspect of health in one together. So when you're looking at those two frameworks, you have to recognize right off the bat that of the primary role that social science have to play in the response to a crisis. My second observation goes to building a bit of what Nancy was saying, and to the evolution of a crisis. From the start to where we are now to where we're going to be further, there is a bubbling up of new information. The environment is changing all the time. The social environment is actually changing all the time. By the time we are having the instruments, the biomedical instruments in our hands in order to better curve or nudge the epidemic curve in the good way, we need to rely on the component of the environmental and the host people in order to nudge this. And so it is absolutely crucial that very much upstreams and in response that we have the tools at place, the people, the expertise, the infrastructure to really engage with the host and environmental aspect of the response. At the end of the day, when we do not have a therapeutic solution, when we do not have a preventive solution such as a vaccine, it is on nudging preventive behavior, which is our best instruments in order to address an epidemic. And how do you really address preventive behavior is way more than just knowledge. Knowledge is one aspect of it, but the opinions, the attitudes, the cultural relationship that people have with the evidence and with the environment in which they have. And so without this fulsome aspect of understanding, you found yourself quite ill-prepared to respond to those aspects. And so one of the points I'd like to bring, in addition to my distinguished colleagues here, is that not only we need mobilization, and I think there's going to be a stratum of that discussion on the mobilization. I think Claudia brings the point that, one notch further is really the integration, that which totally agree. I think I'm advocating here for early institutional and systematic engagement. By the time you have the response, if you don't have that in place, the very concepts of research preparedness must include social science in all aspects. Yes, it is time to build some capacity. Yes, it is time to build some infrastructure as we start an epidemic, but it is certainly time to take action on what we have. And so right now it's the perfect time to really think forward as how do you go from mobilization, how do you go from integration, and to the point of a systematic access and engagement in the full spectrum of social sciences to enable us to early on in the crisis to be able to respond to the environmental and host aspect of the equation that we've been talking about. So it brings me to my last point before we go into a roundtable here is some challenges I can see from our perspective. First, like any domain of science, social science and humanity is vast. And so we need to visualize from a decision-making perspective, how do we engage to this bubble? How do we organize that bubble? And so obviously, any efforts that will organize the field will make it much easier for decision maker to engage with the field in itself. And so that fragmentation or the perception of being too much of a wide field to tackle must be organized by us in order to facilitate that linkage right away. We must admit as well, and I think my colleagues have mentioned as well, the visibility and recognition of social sciences right off bat. We must raise the profile of all sorts of social scientists as a very rigorous, data-driven type of input in order to support our decision. There's still some work to do with changing culture. There's still some work to do in raising profile of those absolutely incredible assets that we have in Canada and elsewhere in the world. I would go even one step further into the cross-disciplinary discussion that Ursula just brought in. Not only you need to add on new perspective, but you need to really mesh those perspectives inside bubbles that I would advocate for transdisciplinary type of exercise in people and in organizations. So then when you have a social scientist with expertise in behavior and communication, that person is also very well versed into responding, for example, to a public health actions or to an environmental actions and things like that. And so that element of transdisciplinarity is absolutely key. And my last point is a point of systematic and early engagement. And we cannot say enough on how much we need to engage them very early. Here at the Public Health Agency of Canada, from an advisory perspective, we're quite blessed to have set an advisory committee that it's called the Public Health Ethic Consultative Group, which basically kind of mimic a bit of the evolution of how we live some of the 6 or 7 last kind of a major epidemic. And they take a prominent role as we are guiding ourselves through very crucial decisions that we're making. And if only one observation I have right now is one by which this one, from a solidarity kind of context to a quite polarized context with inequities and social unrest, has given us the need to more and more have very solid, very rigorous way of approaching social values and the ethical values of our decision. So I'm going to leave it to this for my opening remarks, and much happy to engage with the rest of the discussion. Thank you, Sandra.
Thank you so much, Pascal and Ursula, for your comments. This discussion is so rich, but what I keep hearing is how important it is to be proactive when it comes to integrating social science and humanities to interdisciplinary effort. And that work is being done towards incubating and accelerating these sorts of endeavors so that researchers who might not have been trained for this kind of work in the social science and humanities can understand and be coached to do it properly, and most importantly, to build the connections to be able to prepare for future research. What I'm hearing also is that we need to have exemplars. We need to be able to have models that clearly articulate and communicate the value of this integration of SSH into the interdisciplinary effort, into shaping policy. And I think this is extremely valuable. I'm very excited that this is coming to the fore. But the one thing that I haven't heard so far, not too much about, is about talent. So we have researchers who have research projects who are willing to contribute, but who have obviously not been trained for these. And that's the reason we're trying to catch up, provide them with the tools and with the support that they need to be able to engage in these partnered and user integrated ventures. But how do we prepare the current talent? What is available? What should we be doing? I'm not going to ask what are we doing, but what should we be doing in order to make sure that our anthropologists and our philosophers and our historians are able to, seamlessly move into endeavors that have this interdisciplinary flavor. Ursula, would you like to start?
Yes, this is also a topic very near and dear to our hearts at SSHRC. And there's no question that professional development, I'm going to say professional development opportunities for graduate students are absolutely critical. They're critical at all stages of training, even for established researchers. And we've certainly seen opportunities to do training for knowledge mobilization in very senior ranks in academia. But the earlier we can plant the seed, if you will, within the training of students and our future leaders to build their skills, but build their confidence. We've certainly experienced that in a number of initiatives that we've been holding for the past few years. We'll be going into our 6th year in a partnership with Global Affairs Canada on what's called the International Policy Ideas Challenge. And this is an opportunity to seek policy insights and development on policy on Global Affairs top priority files. There's a rigorous assessment, identification of what across development and trade within Global Affairs to say these are our top priorities for the coming years. And Global Affairs was very particular in as we work together on this objectives to say we want to connect with emerging talent. And we want to see what opportunities we can provide for mentorship and for training. And it's very straightforward. You write a policy brief on a particular topic, and there's a criteria and a selection of winners. But there's a training component along the way, in that we provide presentation skills training so that the winners can come and present before senior officials. There's now mentorship and I'm going to say almost like a fellowship opportunities within the department. There's a real investment in the students, and anecdotally from the students who've among the cohorts of winners, number one, they say this training is not available in my training. I recognize the impact I can have and the contribution I can have as a scholar, as an academic if they're pursuing a role in the academic sector, but also in other sectors. And it was like a light went on, and it was difficult. Like it's a challenge to write policy briefs, but also respecting their role as a scholar, an emerging scholar. And this is another perspective that we need to, or myth, if in fact, that we've had to kind of start breaking apart to say you are a respected scholar in your field with acknowledgements and acclaim as a scholar. You also can and be a successful scholar that contributes to public policy. It's not mutually exclusive. And so this is just one example that we've provided because we saw the gap. We saw the gap of training in policy writing, communication skills, op-ed writing in the media, and certainly in the pandemic, we've seen just this amplification of voices of our scholars in the media, which in and of itself has been a catalyst in terms of the pandemic for somehow turning the green light on and having them in the public realm.
There's definitely these kinds of efforts and to provide, and you call them professional development opportunities to PhD students are quite crucial. But there's also a cultural element within academia that makes it the case that social science and humanities are sometimes a little bit more reluctant to embrace these initiatives and these opportunities because of their conception of what the role of research is in the social science and humanities. But there is definitely a need to transform these attitudes and this culture to bring the social science and humanities, outside of academia. It's quite important. And then the question becomes like, how do we produce a sustainable, transformative approach to training that is going to provide not just a few, but all graduate students, all PhD students with these skills, which are, of course, going to be very useful outside of academia, but that are also absolutely crucial to research in academia as well. The collaboration skills, teamwork, communications, and you were mentioning them. So I think that this is probably one of the biggest questions for academia at this point, especially given the outcomes of the PhD training. But Pascal, I'd like to know if you have insights. So from your perspective, when it comes to the kinds of skills that emerging researchers have in the social science, what should be the priority of the post-secondary education system?
Thank you, Sandra. I'm going to build on Ursula's good thoughts there. I'm a huge advocate of cross-sectorial experiences of all kind. It's not only the what else can we teach them? It's on the how, and it's transformative. When you bring an academic young leader within a government of Canada, for example, real operation, you can tell a whole transformation in how relevant they take their own skills, then they take their own language, but they tune it in a way that is absolutely impactful. And so fellowship, residencies, chairs that are experience-based in organizations are absolutely crucial. Co-locations of teams, co-locations of networks and things like that brings this level of trust and within those cross-sectorial members in order to be very much ready to go the minute that there's an issue goes. And so I think the matter of what skills and what else needs to also be embedded into where and how and with whom, because I think that's really where the impact of the skills are. I believe that our trainees are very well trained and they have a wide spectrum of knowledge and access to so many things, but to have them embedded in our team for a short while or a long while has been the best. Some of the experience I had on my own is that when you bring a PhD student and half of their thesis is actually right hands-on with problems as seen by government Canada people trying to struggle with that issue, they never see their research any the same way any after. And so this kind of a intuitive understanding of how to make your current knowledge and skill impactful goes a long way with this cross-sectorial experience that I would see totally fit to have mechanisms and ways to amplify that in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pascal. I cannot agree more. I'm so glad that you bring up the importance of experiential learning, or that experiential component, because it is clear that this is not only an opportunity for the student to hone and contextualize skills that they acquire through their training, but also to build relationships that can be very, very valuable with the social sector, with the public sector. But again, of course, the problem is scalability. These opportunities are onerous on the side of the host, on the side of the institutions. But more importantly, even though there are some amazing programs that exist in Canada to promote internships, It's not clear that they are adapted to the needs and the constraints of social science and humanities programming and graduate students especially, who whose priorities and needs and interests really need to be taken into account. And the same holds for the kinds of hosts in which these internships can be held, which are not going to be your standard corporate setting. They're going to be not-for-profit. They're going to be local government. They're going to be small B Corps. Very different kinds of hosts that come with different challenges. So how do we make these opportunities more accessible, given the kind of constraints to social science and humanities students? That's a question that I like to think that the collaborative is helping solve, but definitely is exactly, I think, one of the priorities we need to keep in mind.
Can I just add to that, Sandra, very quickly? I think, on the issue of scalability, I think we have to start somewhere. Like what I've described, the international, it's not I don't want to take away the significant amount of work, but this is a really small initiative, but it's really built, and if we're looking at 6 cohorts of 10 winners, so it's not a huge number, but seeing the trajectory of the cohorts and seeing in fact how they've used that experience to meet their goals, their career goals, and how it's enhanced it. The Canada School of Public Service, we partnered with the school to create what's called dialogue study teams with senior ADM officials, DGs in policy, scholars, and graduate students to work together in a collaborative format over a few months to address a particular public administration problem. So there are examples now that are being embedded within departments that we can build upon. It's a question, I think, of connecting them to see what will work to meet the interests of the students. But I go back to your earlier point is, what are the institutional incentives to promote and support students who want to take part in these opportunities?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So maybe at this point, I'd like Claudia and Nancy to join us again, and maybe we could start taking questions from the public. I had earlier a very, very good question in response to what Claudia and Nancy were saying, and it's a question, if I understand correctly, from Simone Martineau. Merci Simone pour cette question très intéressante. So I'll give you that question. But it's for everyone, really. A major contribution of social sciences and humanities is the critical lens that they employ in assessing how society is organized, including a critical look at science-based and other policies. So we're thinking about the critical role of social science and humanities in thinking about science itself. So the question is, how can we encourage decision makers to be open to these crucial critical perspectives, despite the discomfort that they might provoke? And I would add also, given the sort of science skepticism that we witness, is there not a risk in being critical about science in ways? So I think it's a beautiful question. Thanks again for it. So I would like to see what you think. Nancy, what do you think about this question?
Thank you. I was just trying to get my microphone. Fantastic question. Merci beaucoup, Simone. My answer to this question is actually coming from one of extreme bias. I have always led and modeled a very open conversations in terms of reflections on the various disciplines to policy conversations. And I've been a real champion for making sure that as we bring those conversations internally, for example, from within our science and tech organization at Environment and Climate Change Canada to the policy table, it's been a very conscious process. And I think you will find that there are many champions within the federal public service who are really focused on making sure that in the face of the complexity of the issues that we're trying to solve, I think there is, the norm is more openness rather than skepticism in terms of the various disciplines' contributions to those considerations. The issue is around, I think it's around making sure that we capture them, the breadth of considerations concisely in order to be able to captivate the attention of decision makers. That's I think that's where I think the rub really is. But in terms of making sure that critical lens is applied to the challenges that we're facing, there's absolutely an openness to that. That would be my very biased perspective.
No, I don't think he's biased. Add something.
Yeah, I think I would agree with Nancy's view here, and I bias notwithstanding, I certainly in my experience I have seen that there is substantial openness, and in fact maybe even a demand, as Pascal mentioned. There's really a demand from decision makers and policymakers for this kind of critical lens and for this broader understanding of society, of the different publics, and how they function, precisely because of this recognition that uptake of solutions is going to require this deeper understanding and this deeper engagement. So I really do think that there is this openness. But I'll go back to what Pascal says. I think the challenge is not so much in the, in the openness and receptivity to this. I think the challenge for policymakers and decision makers is having those mechanisms already there, right? So we see already, when a pandemic or some crisis or something happens, we kind of have to scramble, put together the expert panel, go calling the folks that we know have something important to contribute. And so then, that's great once it gets started. The real trick is trying to figure out, what do we do to be ready for this, sort of the preparedness beforehand, right? So what is the mechanism or that structure going to look like? And I think it was Ursula used the term, the systems, right? What's the system that's in place so that policymakers and decision makers can really tap into that knowledge, tap into what's already there, and you don't have to be doing the scramble after the fact, so to speak. That there's already things in place that you can tap into that are helping to shape these decisions, right? So we see a little bit of this now. We're starting to see that more of this, for example, in ethics review, right? So now, following H1N1, following SARS, following Ebola, what do we see? Are there fast track mechanisms for doing ethics review of protocols and clinical trials in a pandemic so we can get research going? So there's, these kinds of formats or templates or things that we can do. So there's one small bit, doesn't cover it all, but it's something that we've recognized now. But what would be the equivalent of something like that in terms of, human capital and those human resources? How do we assemble the knowledge, the people, the things that we need, have a system in place so we can tap into it, to access that when we need it?
Thanks so much. Sorry I disappeared for a few seconds here. Ursula, would you like to say something on this question as well, or should we go on to the next question? And please, if you have a questions, please feel free to write it down in the discussion forum, and we'll do our best to address it.
Well, maybe in the interest of time, we should move to some of the questions. But I would just say that those mechanisms, they do exist, but they're kind of they're perhaps not as well known. I'm going to be the myth buster a little bit, because we've seen those networks grow. We've seen the start of some of those relationships being built. We see the impact in our programs in terms of who the partnerships are, the topics that are related to facilitating a discussion even 4 years before it really hits us. And I think this is so critical, is that we can't just be reactive. We have to be open to the idea. So, and then just quickly, Pascal's comment earlier, that how we define a challenge evolves in a certain environment. We identified the emerging asocial society in 2017 as a significant societal challenge for Canada. And everyone was scratching their heads saying, what do you mean? 20s, like, there's no problem. And it was in the context of the impact of technologies. So this is the competition we currently have in play. Well, I think now we have a much more receptive understanding of what that actually means for societal cohesion and global health and wellness. So it's also being open to establishing those networks well before it hits us.
There's a way in which the move towards partnered research, which SSHRC has strongly encouraged, because we can see that a lot more funding is being assigned to partnerships within the SSHRC portfolio at this point. It's also an absolutely crucial move when it comes to predicting what are going to be the needs, because these opportunities to work with the community, they will inform the research priorities in a way that is very organic and that is in line with what society needs. So I think that it's not just about foresights, but it's about the partnerships themselves that are likely to transform the research perspective. And it would be interesting to see the impact that these partnerships have had in moving the needle in terms of research priorities over the last 10 years. We have another question. This one is a little bit outside of the scope, but I would like to ask it anyway, because I think it's not a completely disconnected question. So we can think about the other big challenges, such as AI, when we think about complexity. And the question to the panel is whether you see social science and humanities to be organically mobilized or mobile with the arrival of these disruptive technology. Do you see, I mean, obviously there's a role. Do you see that there will be additional challenges in integrating the social science and humanities in these discussions?
Maybe if Sandra, I can say a few remarks here, and my colleagues add on. I think actually the question is actually very well related to crisis in itself. One of the key aspects of addressing a crisis is to, by all means, maintain and strengthen trust with the citizens and trust with the population. So the question becomes, how do you really engage in a very trustful way with the citizen and the population that they say, I'm going to listen to this organization and I'm going to actually follow the guidelines and I'm going to be with them. And what's difficult in a trustful relationship is how things move so fast. We've mentioned here in the COVID, not only we're addressing a virus epidemic, we're addressing an info epidemic as well. And people are confused. People have a hard time to sort it out. And that brings, fragility in the trust zone as well. Technology is another of those. People see technology a lot like a black box, and they don't see the inside of the black box. People would remember some attempts early in the pandemic to resolve some of our issues with new technology. And usually, there's some early adopters, but usually when there's too much of a black box in the technology, people will push back. They say, I'm not ready for this. I'm not ready to see the potential impact on equity. I'm not ready to see the potential impact on my personal security and all of those aspects. And so I think the merging of fast evolving technology, fast evolving information production, the fast evolving of demography and cultural is actually fragility in strengthening the trust relationship we have with our institution. And yet again, back to how important the social science it is to advise people like us in order to keep that strength of trust that we have with the citizen and the population. Thank you.
Yeah, trust and transparency are crucial to science and to evidence-based policy making. That's clear. Claudia, would you like to add something to this?
Yeah, I think you read my mind. So I was listening to Pascal, and really, the concept of trust really resonated. So at the Institute, we have an entire pillar which is on ethics and emerging technology, and in particular, this is where our work and my group is, a multidisciplinary group with social scientists, philosophers, epidemiologists, lawyers. Like, we really are a group, multidisciplinary capabilities, addressing, broader ESC, ethical, social, cultural issues in global health research. And the emerging tech space is one where I think we see our disciplines really shine because of that trust issue. So what happens when emerging technologies come onto the scene? It's always, we see it play out many times before. So think recombinant DNA, think stem cells, think genetic cloning, and now in our experience with gene drive technology for malaria eradication, what you see is that there is, first of all, there's already kind of a general distrust of science and technology just because of historical abuses in the past. And we see this much more from traditionally marginalized groups that have been excluded from research, women, young adolescents, people who are living in low and middle income countries and communities that have traditionally not been part of research. And you see that these questions of trust come up there, but also because when a technology is new, there's so many questions about its risks and benefits. There's so much uncertainty. Uncertainty tends to bring out fear and skepticism, or at least amplify what's already there. And so in order to, one, address these questions, well, what are the real risks? What are the real benefits? How is this what does this mean for me? Because I mean, the whole point of disruptive is it's going to come in and change something. And there's always a discomfort when things are changing, when things are new, and we don't quite understand how they work. So getting that right, and then building up that component of trust. And it's trust not just in technology, but trust in the researchers, the developers, who's funding like that whole network, the entire enterprise. Building trust in that is a critical piece. And this is where social scientists and humanists really come in. And this whole question, how you understand how society is organized, what are the questions and concerns that people have, how do we bring this along? So I think that's really critical. We see this time and time again. And I can say from my experience that almost without a doubt, for every single emerging tech or a new technology, a new way of doing things, because it could be an old technology, but applied in a new context, whenever we've not brought to bear the ESC thinking, the ethical, social, cultural thinking to it, it has failed. It has failed, even simple things. So contraception, drugs, diagnostics, things that sit on shelves, empty shelves in many parts of the world that people won't use it, won't adopt it, or suspicious of it because we've not brought this thinking into bear and really understood, that end user perspective, the community perspective, those, broader streams of knowledge, as Ursula mentioned earlier.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating topic, this question of trust, and in a way, any tech is going to require some sort of understanding of its impact on human life and on society as a whole, and trust revolves around that. So there's a role for explaining what these impacts are going to be to build trust. But there's also a role for questioning these impacts themselves and their value for human life. And that's definitely in the realm of social sciences. It's all the more complex that this understanding, this rational presentation of the value of a tech, even if we had it, might not be the most compelling evidence or the evidence on the basis of which people will react. So understanding human psychological response to these understandings is also absolutely crucial. So I felt I needed to do that.
Sorry,
yes. Go ahead.
I just want to thank Pascal and Claudia, because it's wonderful to hear a point and a positioning for the role of social sciences in tech, which is, of course, Shirk is advocating for many years and decades. But if there was an additional panel on Monday on the role of social science and humanities, looking at the socioeconomic impacts of quantum. So I would just encourage everyone to take a look at that if you'd like further kind of perspectives and insights on this question.
And we are going to have to wrap up. So I'm going to maybe give everyone a few seconds to maybe say one sentence or a few words to summarize what they see as a priority for SSH. Nancy, would you like to start?
I just wanted to thank everyone for participating, and absolutely, my sentence would be continue with your ambition. We're in this together and looking forward to working together collectively to truly rise to the global challenges we're facing.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this panel. It's been a terrific opportunity to hear, and I think everybody. I echo the sentiments that have been expressed here today. What very insightful. Thank you, Sandra, for moderating. And I think my closing thought is really to emphasize that importance of our social sciences and humanities in public health and in health response. And I think in thinking about how we move forward in integrating, I think it's going back to that the pedagogical and experiential learning training are the next generation of scholars who are going to be the next generation of policymakers and decision makers to appreciate its value and to bring it up right from the beginning. Thank you.
Thank you. And I believe we're over time, but maybe Pascal and Ursula, a few words, and then we will wrap up.
Very quickly, my last word is one of hope. I'm absolutely so convinced that we're living a pivotal moment into the visibility, recognitions, and integration of social sciences in all spheres of the crisis. And I see it, I live it, and let's do it. Thank you.
Pascal, Ursula?
Thank you so much for this opportunity. Excellent discussion. I would end with saying let's continue to build those those opportunities for inclusive, innovative, collaborative teams and networks and respectful relationships to truly address the complexity of the global challenges that will just continue to grow. Thank you so much.
Thanks again so much to all the panelists. We will produce a transcript and a report of the session. We'll make it available to everyone on the Collaborative's website. And we'll be looking forward to seeing you again.